A little bit about myself. My name is Vidar Elven. I work at a company called Skill as an architect in the cloud and data center. I also have an engagement with Microsoft as a partner, technology solution professional, and had been for many years a Microsoft certified trainer and systems engineer. I'm actually not a trainer anymore because I hadn't the opportunity to keep up with the training assignments, and now I work mostly as a consultant. So today's theme is publishing applications. So we have a menu. We are going to look at the different options for publishing applications. We are looking at the ingredients. What do we need to start publishing? We are looking at some different recipes, how you go about to publish those applications, depending on which types. And we are looking at the consumption of them. Also, how is these users going to use those applications? What are the options? How does it look? We also have some extras and troubleshooting about self-service. So a lot of stuff to cover, but we have some main points. We'll start with that, and we'll go deeper into demos as we go. First, I would want to ask you, how many are using Azure AD here today? That's quite a good number. Is it mostly Office 365 you're using? Yeah. I suspect it should be a lot more hands using Office 365. One more? Yeah, that's a little bit more. And you might have Azure running infrastructure services and everything in Azure. How many have published or looked into applications in Azure? Yeah, good. Well, the key features with Azure AD is it's an identity and access control solution. Not only for cloud resources, but also for resources in your local on-premise data center. That's the key feature of Azure AD. It's a platform service. It is running in Azure, of course, and enables a lot of the other scenarios and functionality we are talking about. For example, enterprise mobility, a key enabler for enterprise mobility. Because in mobility, it's all about users and the devices they use, and the applications they access, and the data that they access through those applications. And then one other key feature is the identity. One common identity, a hybrid identity if you want. That you have this identity from your local on-premise environment, and you're using Azure AD Connect to synchronize it to Azure AD, and you want to use that same identity both for cloud resources and on data center on-premise resources. So I guess most of you that have Azure AD have Azure AD Connect, DearSync or something. Yeah. How many are upgraded and running the latest version of Azure AD Connect? Great. So this is part of the requirements. We will get into that, but we are not going to cover Azure AD Connect or the synchronization in itself, because that's another topic. So there are some business value for organizations using Azure AD and publishing applications. We can control access to applications. For example, we can choose which applications the users are going to see. And these applications can be published at the My Apps portal. We'll get into that later. They have an app launcher, for example, in Office 365, and some other options. So we can control access, and we can do that with single sign-on if we configure it correctly. Another value is the opportunity to run conditional access. For example, you can require multi-factor authentication for some apps if you want. And you can use multi-factor authentication depending on where the user is. Is he inside the organization's network, or is he outside the organization's network? Other scenarios in the enterprise mobility include required device enrollment, compliance, and so on. Hybrid identity, important business value. By enabling hybrid identity, we can have the same identity logging into the online applications. And when I run, you see it at the bottom there, I have a local portal that runs on the local data center, and it's logged in with the same user as my cloud user. And we can enable self-service, which can be of great value for organizations. Users can help themselves with access to applications, and they can help themselves, for example, to do password reset when they cannot access the applications because they have forgotten their username, password, sorry. If they've forgotten their username, it's a different story. So, the big picture. To publish Azure AD applications, we select applications for one of 3 items on the menu. Either we have an application that we are developing ourselves, or maybe an application we have licensed and you are using in Azure AD. For example, Office 365 or other applications. We have also the opportunity to choose from a very extensive gallery of software as a service applications. There are more than 2,500 applications in the SaaS Gallery now, and some of them enable true single sign-on, and some enable password-based same sign-on. We will look into that as well. And the third option is to publish applications that you want to have accessible from outside your network. Think about proxy, reverse proxy. You publish applications that are normally only available internally, and you want users to have it accessible outside. Reverse proxy as a service, you can call it. We will also get into that. The ingredients, you need 3 main parts. Azure AD, of course. And Azure AD we have in different flavors. We have the basic Azure AD, which are included with other other services you are using, for example, Office 365, or if you are running an Azure subscription. And we have the basic and premium versions of Azure AD. There are some differences between what we can do with those. Identity, we can run mainly based cloud identities if we want. Most will have hybrid identities. And we need, of course, applications to publish. So we do have to have some applications we want to publish. So we will look into that. So these are the picture. As I mentioned, there are 3 editions of Azure Active Directory. Everybody gets free, but you can pay for and have basic and premium editions. Anybody running basic or premium here? Most people that are running premium maybe have it in Enterprise Mobility Suite. Yeah. Enterprise Mobility Suite is something you can try out. There's a free 30-day trial. It's really easy to set up, and you can do everything I talk about today at your home lab or in your office from tomorrow. Not tomorrow, maybe you are here, but Monday. I also wanted to highlight some of the features. How is this looking on the screen? This is very small. Is this okay? Okay? Yeah. So in the different editions, and I will focus only on the features that are relevant for application publishing. All the editions, they have user and group management. You can add provision and so on. All of them have also single sign-on, but there are some limitations for free and basic. I had a picture of an access panel there where I have all these published applications, and free and basic can only have 10 at a time. You can publish as many as you want, but the user will only see 10. For premium, there are no limit. Every edition have self-service password change for cloud users. That means you can change your password if you know it, but you cannot reset it if you have forgotten it. And everybody can run Azure AD Connect. There are some limitations on the reporting side. Only premium can have a lot of advanced reports for reporting. If I add the premium and basic features, these are features that you pay for. Then you can use groups for application access and provisioning. And you can use self-service password reset for cloud users. So then the users can reset their passwords if they are cloud users only. That's not hybrid identity users. And you can do some branding, and we can do this application proxy, this reverse proxy as a service I was talking about, and we will get into that later. The SLA also comes in the picture with the paid versions. And the premium only features are the ability to self-service reset password, and you can use other advanced functions like Cloud App Discovery, Connect Health. You can use self-service for group management and access to applications and more. So there's a lot of extra functions in the premium version that gives value. Okay, so let's get into the first demo of today. So I'll just duplicate my screen every time I do a demo. Easier that way. Let's see. There we are. To manage Azure Active Directory and the application and everything, I have to use the classic portal. It's not available in the new Azure portal yet, but it will come. I don't know when, but for now, the classic portal. I'm using a premium license, so I have done some branding. So I have a nice picture of a river, which is Elven, you know, and I have some Elvish letters. Did you get that? Yeah, great, nerd. So, Azure Active Directory. I have my own Azure Active Directory in my company's subscription, so this is the one I will work with. When you set up Azure Active Directory, you can configure it for directory integration. That's important if you want to have hybrid identity. So you can see that I have directory sync enabled, but I am not enabled ADFS. By the way, using ADFS for local and on-premise single sign-on, it will work with everything I do today. The only thing is that you will be redirected down to the local ADFS farm every time you authenticate. So this is one thing it's nice to have in place. The domain part, to use my own custom domain. This is my tenant name, and this is my custom domain, which I will use in several scenarios. So this is something that you need to have in place. And on the configuration part, let's see. Yeah, we have some branding. If I want users to have a password reset and more. Yeah. Password write back. This is for the self-service scenarios. And yeah, Azure AD join devices and more. This is the group management features I was talking about for self-service. So if you have enterprise mobility or Azure AD Premium, you can enable those kind of features. And application proxy, you can manage here. We will get back to that later. Yeah, and more. This is also important if I want to use multi-factor authentication. I can add my company's known IP ranges here, so that I can, if I want to, only present users with MFA if they are outside the IP network, for example. And on the license part, I can see that I have some licenses. It's a cheap environment, one license only, but it's not for my demos. If you have the trial, you have a lot more licenses to play with for 30 days. All right, so this is what I require. I need this Azure AD, preferably with a custom domain, preferably with hybrid identity and sync, optionally with local ADFS, and after that you're ready to go. And we will work inside those this tab here called applications, and I have already published a lot of applications here, and some of these applications here will be there automatically. If you have Office 365, you will see those applications. If you're running EMS, you will have Microsoft Intune. If you have some Visual Studio and everything. So some of these applications will already pre-existing when you go into there, dependent on what your licenses are for Azure AD organization. Okay. Let's go back to the presentation. It's a nice picture, but it's not what you want to see. Sorry. There. Okay. So we have my Azure AD environment in place, and I can now go about to publish those applications. So just a short summary here for what you need to think about when you are going to publish applications. You have to configure what type of single sign-on you want to use, if you want to use applications from the gallery. Do you want to have Azure AD single sign-on, dependent on the application? Or are you going to use password-based single sign-on? You have to assign users and groups, and you have some optional configuration. For example, those access rules, depending on whether to use multi-factor authentication, self-service access, and you can also configure some attributes. And then you can publish those applications. I will get back to that demo right away. But at the same time, if you don't want to use applications from the gallery, you can also publish your own applications. For example, if you have a web application. That web application can be something that you have developed locally. Most times it would be a web application you are using in Azure Web as a platform service, Azure website. At the same as the SaaS applications, you have to choose which users or groups are going to have access to that. You can in fact configure that you require that users have access. So even though the URL for the web app is publicly available, no user are going to access that web applications if you are not assigned them to do that. And that's nice. And you can also here do all these things like access rules, MFA, self-service, but you can configure more about what the applications are permitted to do and a custom logo on your own. So let's look at that. At the bottom here, I have an add button, and I'm presented with the 3 choices for applications to publish. The last one publish application that will be accessible outside my network. It will be only available if I'm running a basic or premium version of Azure AD. Or else I will only see the two top ones. So let's add an application from the gallery. Here I have a lot of different options. Most of the popular SaaS apps in the world will be here in this gallery. Everyone that's in the list of featured, they are ready for true single sign-on and account provisioning. So these are applications that are specifically designed to work with Azure AD in the true single sign-on and provisioning environment. For example, Dropbox for Business, Facebook at Work, Google Apps, and more. Salesforce. There's a lot of different and popular applications there. You can also select your own custom application. If you have an application with a login form, you can use that and use password-based single sign-on, same sign-on it will be on that. So if you have an URL to an application, you can type that in and it will detect the login form. And as I said, over 2,500 applications, there's a lot of them. For now, I'm just will do a search. And an example, I will publish Twitter. There we go. And you might think, why I am going to publish Twitter? What's the value in publishing Twitter? The users, they log in themselves. By the way, the use of these SaaS applications and all this, why we are doing this? We're trying to get control of the applications the users are using, because we have a lot of shadow IT out there. Users are using a lot of different services. I mentioned at the premium feature, you can do a cloud app discovery. You can push agent out to your computers, and you can actually discover what kind of applications the users are in fact using. But back to Twitter, why do I want to publish that? Well, maybe my company have a company account for Twitter. The marketing department, for example. Maybe we have a company account for Facebook or other applications. Here, I can publish that application. I can type in the password for them. So the only thing they can do is to launch the application. You don't have to tell them the username and the applications, which I think that a lot of our organizations do. And what about when the user quits? Well, he can take that username and password with him. If you do it with Azure AD, you have control over the application and the user. So, configure single sign-on. Well, Twitter will use password-based single sign-on. I don't know if Twitter will support ADFS, but if there are some opportunities to use the local ADFS environment for a federation, you can possibly do that with some applications. So I select password single sign-on, and then I will need to assign accounts. So depending, I have this test user here, and I can assign. And for every password-based application I publish, I can select to enter the Twitter credentials on the behalf of the user. If I don't do that, the user will be prompted at first launch. So in that case, the user can use that like an advanced password management system, if you let the users manage themselves. But if I do that here, let's see, I can do my own account. And this is also interesting. I can make this password to do an automatic password rollover. In that respect, I can choose a frequency. that Azure AD actually are going to change the password in Twitter for me. So again, great if you have a common type of application that you want users to not have the password. You don't want the risk that they know the password. You want Azure AD to control and you have the access. So I will not enable that for my private account now. But I enable that user. Another application, Google Apps, which I've already configured because it takes a little bit time, just a few minutes, but still. At a quick start, if I select configure single sign-on, this, by the way, requires me to have a Google Apps subscription. So if I'm using Google Apps, I can do this. I have a trial account there. And this way, I want to have Azure AD single sign-on. And I have to do a Google Work URL here. Basically, it will be my private domain. And I can make Azure AD automatically configure the single sign-on with Google. If I want to have manually, then I will be presented with a certificate and some URLs I have to manually configure in the Google admin panel. And in this case, I can have Google to automatically configure. So I have already done that. Another thing I have done is enabled account provisioning. This means that if I create a new account in Azure AD and I assign it access to Google Apps, that user will automatically be created in Google Apps for me. So then I can tell them, now you can sign into Google Apps. This is something also I have created in advance. So let's see, let's add a user. I create a new user in my organization. I call it NICconf at elven.no. Nick the 5th. Just an ordinary user. And create a temporary password. I'm doing a little shortcut here. I could create that user on premise and do the dir sync and everything, but in this case I'm just creating it directly in the cloud. So yeah. So what I want to do now is I want to log on to that user in Azure AD. So if I'll just select my apps, NICconf, so this is a completely new account. I sign in. I have to change the password. So this is a new user. He has no applications published, nothing. Let's sign out again. Then I can go to Google Apps and user and groups. And here we have the account. It's unassigned now, but I assign it now to Google Apps. This means that this user will be synchronized automatically to Google Apps and be configured for using that. That provisioning will run approximately every 10 minutes. So I will get back to that later. The only thing I will show now is I'll log into my admin account for Google. Sorry. Admin Google. Oops. So this is the Google Work admin console. I have some more controls here. For example, security, single sign-on. I told you earlier that I had already configured Google Apps to do single sign-on, and here you can see the result. The sign-in page, the sign-out page, everything is connected to Azure AD now. Users. I only have one user now. This is where the NICconf user will appear shortly. We'll get back to that in a little while. So for software as a service applications, we can do that kind of either Azure AD single sign-on. We can also do single sign-on with the ADFS with the application supported. And a lot of the applications can do this password-based single sign-on. The other scenario I wanted to show you was publish your own application. In the new portal, you have app services. It used to be called web apps. Now it's just app services. So here I have some different web applications. I will add a new one. I will call it NICconf demo web app. It's free. I have this green cross that says that I can use this URL. Select a subscription, a resource group, and an app service plan. This default one is a free one, so it will not cost me anything. And then the deployment starts for the application. It's very easy to create web applications in Azure. Should be pretty quick. There we are. So now I do have an application. I can just select, copy that URL. I can just type it in. And there's a default text there. This is nothing to see, but just a web app. I can start filling it with content. I want to have this web app to use Azure AD as sign-in. That's very easy to do as well. I have on the feature here, authentication and authorization. I want to enable authentication, and I can select that I want to log in with Azure Active Directory. I can also configure not only Azure Active Directory, but several other authentication providers. I will do an express setup. My current Active Directory is Elven Azure AD, that's correct. And it will prompt me to either select an existing web app that I will have in this other portal. You know, here, if I go back here, these are the applications I have now. So I can select one of them if I already had a published application, but I will create a new one. Create new, and I will call it the same name as the web app here. Okay. And it will be, yeah, of course. I keep forgetting that save button over there. So, then the application has been configured with with Azure AD authentication. Now let's look on how this works. I type in the URL, and you can see I cannot access the URL directly any longer. I now have to choose which user to log into. I can do that user, or I can just do another account. Actually, I'll just show that as well. I do have my work account here as well, because it is attached to my Windows 10 machine. I can do a login with that, and you will see what happens. Do you think I should be able to log in with that account? No. By the way, we are running ADFS, so I will be prompted to do an authentication there. And you can see, sorry, there's some message down here. User account from identity provider does not exist in tenant Elven Azure AD. I can add it as an external user though, if I have guest access to my Azure AD. But as expected, I'm not able to log in. I can use my demo account. Oops. There we are. Now I have access. Another thing that's easy to do is doing, let's see here. There we are. Sorry, there. I can download a publish file, publish settings file. Was in the downloads, okay, yeah. And if I have Visual Studio, I can create a new project. And is there anyone using Visual Studio here? Great, so you can see that. It's really easy as well. I create a new project, ASP.NET Web Application. I just select the empty one. If I select one of the others, I can change and do authentication directly here, but I have already configured that in Azure AD now, so I will create an empty one. So you have some options to create and publish those applications directly from Visual Studio, but I'm just creating an empty project now. Yeah, and I will get some code. I will add just a simple default web page. Here we are. And just replace that standard code with some code I created on my own. Basically, I'm just picking up the Azure AD claims here. I want to actually let the application show me what kind of user I'm logged in as. Yeah, just saving. And I downloaded a publish settings file. So when I want to publish this application, I can just select publish here and have a custom, import, publish profile, this one. So that publish settings file are already pre-configured with access to do web deployment. You can validate the connection. Yeah, next. Yeah, and I just do a publish here. This will just publish that default page I have created, and it will show that instead. It automatically launches the application as well. So, yeah. Now I was logged in with my MSDN account, but I can look at the user later, and I will see that I'm logged in with my correct information from Azure AD. I was just missing an image. I will show that. Add existing item. Yeah. And do another publish. Yeah, then it's looking a little bit nicer when I added logo as well. Okay. At this point, everyone in my Azure AD can access that application. Just if they have an Elven Azure AD account, they can access it. I want to have better control. So, as I mentioned earlier, let's do a little refresh here. In the new portal, I created that web app, and I also wanted to create an Azure application for it that you will see here. So this is the NICconf demo web app. When I go to configure, I can select this button, user assignment required to access app. This means that now the users have to be assigned either via a group or directly to be able to log on to the application. Let's save that. I can also upload a logo for better presentation. There we are. So, there you can see, I have an application logo now. Let's assign a user to the application. For example, this one. I will do assigned. But I will not assign the test user Nick the 5th. So if I go to this application now, yeah, I just have to do a new session. It's quick. NICconf demo. Yeah. So if I try to log in with NICconf at elven.no, I get an error, access denied. The sign-in user has not been assigned a role for the application. So mission accomplished. If I try to sign in with my other user, which I have assigned. Then oh, sorry, wrong password. There we are. And I'm allowed because it's assigned and with all my claims shown. Great. Let's have a look at Google Apps. So it's type 2 users here. If I go to users, I have now 2 users, but the new one is suspended because it's not really logged into Google Apps yet, but now it's been provisioned. So, a new session. And now, I have told that new user that you can log out and go to your new Google account, NICconf at elven.no. And the user are redirected to Azure AD. Yeah, that's right. After this step. Yeah, first type in the name, and then I will be directed to the local ADFS. Yeah, at this point. Yeah. Yeah, and I have to do some first-time verification with Google and everything. So, and then I will get access. Seven, 6, 5. Three, 7. Oops. Welcome to your new account. So, sign in with Azure AD, but using Google Work. The same will apply to Facebook at Work, for example, when it comes. I think that for many companies will be used, but many also are using Azure AD, so it will be interesting to look at that. All right. Let's get back to the presentation. So we have looked at some different scenarios about applications, either from the gallery or from what I can publish on my own. What about the applications you already have inside your network? And that's where Azure AD Application Proxy comes in. Anyone was at John Craddock's session earlier today? Yeah, he will do a separate session only on Azure AD Application Proxy tomorrow, so he will go more detailed than I will do here. But basically, Azure AD Application Proxy, it's about publishing those HTTP or HTTPS applications from inside your network. You require an Azure AD Basic or Premium to have this to work. There's John there. I'm just telling that you are going to deep into this scenario with Azure AD Application Proxy tomorrow. Thank you. Yeah. First session, right? Yeah, 9 o'clock. Yeah. No hangover. So you have some identity scenarios. You can use this with only Azure AD Identity, but then you can not really have the through single sign-on and hybrid identity scenarios with the local authentication. I think Jon will show a lot of those different scenarios tomorrow. You can have synchronized. You can also use an alternative attribute to those internal applications. For example, if the user principal name is not really consistent with what you're logging in with inside, you can use the email attribute or so on. And you can have federated identity with single sign-on, for example, if you are using local ADFS. You need to enable Azure AD Proxy services for directory. You need to install one or more Azure AD Proxy connectors. This is software running on your local servers, either in the local data center, or it can run on servers in Azure, for example, if you are running those applications there. You configure those connectors to be in connector groups. This is great because you can have different kind of groups which are nearer to the applications you are thinking about publishing. For example, you can have web applications that are running in a DM set, then you will need connectors organized in a group there. And you can have connectors running in the internal server LAN, for example, and you can organize them. And of course, you need some proxy applications to publish. So, Jon, are you going to show the actual installation of that connector software tomorrow? Yeah? Oh. Yeah. Then I will just do a quick video here, just a couple of minutes. So I will talk you through it. But as you can see, I'm now going into my Azure AD. And on the configure page, I can scroll down to the connectors. So here I have the application proxy, and I've enabled it. I talked about that. You have to enable it first. And if you push on Manage Connectors, you will see your existing connectors. I didn't have one here. There's a software download link. I download that to the server I want to use. It's a really easy setup. I type in my administrator account. This will register this application proxy connector to the Azure AD. So you want to install this connector on servers that are going to be able to contact those internal HTTP or HTTPS servers. So this is basically it. You can also do a verification at the end, a troubleshooting tool. You can also run that separately if you want. Yeah, it says that there is no connectivity issues. This connector, it has to be able to reach out to some Azure services. Yeah, I think I will go and stop the video there because I'm going to event logs and everything, and we're starting to get a little bit short of time. But basically you get an application proxy specific event log here, so you can do something with that. So there's a great troubleshooting guide written by that man, which also have some good scenario descriptions for the different kind of scenarios you will use with Azure AD Application Proxy. You can use pass-through. In that case, you just want internal application to either do application or its own authentication, or maybe no authentication at all, just passing through. That's one scenario. You can do pre-authentication. This means that you make Azure AD do the authentication before they can access the resource. But depending on the internal application, it can have its own authentication mechanism. Often you will have that if you are using forms-based, for example. And the most valuable scenario, if you can do that, you can create a pre-authentication with Kerberos authentication to the internal app. Then you will have true single sign-on. So to specify and publish an application proxy application, you need that internal URL, and the server running that application proxy connector, of course, has to be able to connect to that. You can select what authentication method you are going to use. You can assign users and groups. You can do additional configuration, like which connector group are we going to use, some header translations options, internal authentication, SPN, which you need when you are doing Kerberos delegated, and what kind of login identity you want to use. You can also use your custom domain, uploading a private or a certificate with a private key, so that you can use your own domain name as well. And as with the other applications, you can do access rules, multi-factor, self-servicing, and do logos on that. So in the last few minutes, just a quick look at how that looks. There we are. So I've already published one application here, several actually. I have several proxy applications. Oh, sorry. Duplicate. Here we are. Back here. So I have several proxy applications listed here. For example, I published the internal Cyrus on self-service portal. This is a service manager portal. It could be another type of portal. It could be Exchange or SharePoint internally, for example, or other websites. I have configured this app to have a custom logo and a name. I have used my own domain name and a custom FQDN. If I do that, I have to go to my DNS for this domain and make a CNAME record that points to this MS App Proxy net address. At pre-authentication, I can select if it's running pass-through or if Azure AD should be doing the authentication in forehand. If I'm using my own name, I also have to upload a certificate that's consistent with the name over here. And put on the internal URL, this is the URL for the internal server. And integrated Windows authentication means that I will be using Kerberos constrained delegation. And then I also have to specify this SPN. And I also need on my, let's see here. There we are. On my connector machine, which is this one, I also need to create that same SPN with a Kerberos delegation record. If I do that, then everything will work as it should. This is something you do in detail tomorrow, right? Yeah. So if you want to dive more into this scenario, please go to Jan's session tomorrow. I've talked about access rules, so I can require multi-factor authentication. I can do self-servicing, so the users can log on and access the applications themselves. And from the user perspective, this will look something like this. I can either go directly to the self-service URL, or I can go to the application panel. I'm just wrapping out now. Oh, so starting to get some fat fingers. There we are. So I talked about this application here. So if I push that, it will start and wake up the application. You know about web applications, if they've not been used for a while, they have to start up their application pool. And there we are. Logged into an internal application with my username. I think it's quite a great feature. So, just to wrap up. The users can access those applications either directly if they have the URL. For example, My Apps, this is the application panel. There is also a mobile app you can download for iOS or Google Play, where you can access these applications. If you have Office 365, you have the app launcher in the left window. You can use it there. You can also pin it to that app launcher. There's a managed browser app that supports now My Apps, and you can go directly to the URL. You can use conditional access if you want, and you can use self-servicing. I really didn't get into showing you that, but when the users are going to this portal, they have get more applications, and they can provide themselves access to the applications you want to make them able to do self-service for. So that's the self-service, and also password reset. It works great. So I will not do a demo on that now. There are some resources that it's great to know. There's a Azure AD TechNet blog. There is a separate blog on Azure AD App Proxy. It's the white paper that I was talking about that John Craddock has written. The link is there. And a little bit self-promotion. I have basically described a lot of these scenarios and created guides for publishing at my blog. So please visit that if you want to look into it. Please come up or outside here for questions. I have to leave this room for next presenter, or reach out to me at my Twitter account or email if you want to. Thank you.